Hi, I'm Catherine Vesilopoulos. Starting my own venture wasn't easy. After a decade working in the corporate world, I realized that so many things were out of my control, like layoffs and changes in direction. I didn't like the instability. I didn't want that to define my whole career and professional story. And so, I left. I started my own company and achieved more than I ever imagined. Now I'm on a mission to share stories from extraordinary entrepreneurs who are changing the world and who never gave up on their vision. Each of us leaves behind a legacy. We pollinate others with ideas, beliefs, and advice throughout our lives. And when we pass on, it's these gifts that continue to make an impact, shaping the values of others even after we leave. But to leave behind great things, you need to understand your relationship with time. While she's always looked towards the future, researcher and founder Thilde Peterson now finds herself in an often reflective state. When she considers her own legacy, it's clear that the values her family instilled in her certainly left their mark. From her father, who lived through major military conflicts, to her outgoing sister who became friends and pen pals with Frank Sinatra, her family has molded her into the person she is today. And when you hear her speak, it's clear that their legacies live on through the wisdom she shares. Through a combination of grit and serendipity, Thilde's life path eventually led her to found Clock School. It's essentially a program aimed at teaching time management, but it really teaches its students to shift their perception of time and their relationship with it so that they can live a more fulfilled life. At her core, Thilde wants others to make the most of the time they have, leave an impact, and free themselves from time poverty in the process. In this intimate and reflective conversation, Thilde shares with us the values she learned as a young girl that set her up for success later in life. She also recounts the greatest lessons she learned from her family through periods of love and loss, and shares invaluable tips on how to make the most of the time you have. Hello, Thilde. Welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you here today, and you come highly recommended, and I just can't wait to have this conversation with you. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here too.
So you're joining us from France, in Toulouse.
Correct.
Tell us a bit about why you're there.
Well, I'm actually here getting a doctorate degree in organizational behavior. I've been here in October. It'll be 3 years. So I did a Master of Science here, year 1, and I'm just finishing up my second year of my doctorate going into year number 3.
And how did this happen? Like, what brought you to this realization that now is the time to actually do this in your life?
Well, it goes back a little bit before a PhD. So I graduated from undergraduate in May of 1973 from Cornell University. And I went out into the world. A couple of years later, I thought about going back to school, but there were family pressures. I had a handicapped sister and parents who, really needed some help. So I worked, and I loved working. And I worked for a long, long time. And just a few years ago, when I was 68, I lost my handicapped sister. And one of the last things she ever said to me was, "I want you to go back to grad school." And so by chance, a few weeks later, I found out about a master's program online from HEC Paris, which I was privileged to be admitted to. And I graduated there in 2020. And one of my professors said, "I know you are an entrepreneur. I know you own your own company. I know you want to prove that your product works, but you can't go hire somebody. You need to go do the dirty work yourself." And I said, "Do you have any idea how old I am?" And he goes, "I don't care how old you are." So I applied to 2 universities here in France, got into both of them, but because of the pandemic, I came to Toulouse. So it's kind of a miracle, to be honest.
Yeah, and it came from being just a little bit pushed by your sibling, and you kind of got her permission.
Yes, absolutely.
Tell me more about your sister and your relationship to her.
So we came from a family where there had been 8 pregnancies and only 4 surviving children. So my mother lost a baby before me, a baby after me, and another child towards the end of the time that she was able to have children. But the third child to come was Pamela, and she was born with something called spina bifida. She had an open spine. When they tried to close it over in 1956, it created something called water on the brain, hydrocephalus. And Children's Hospital in Philadelphia was a groundbreaking institution that had just taken the design of a shunt, a piece of plastic that they put down the jugular vein to help ward off all of this fluid that would build up on a baby's head. And my sister was one of the first patients in a trial, clinical trial.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And out of the 13 children that were in her cohort, she was the only one who survived.
Wow.
So she lived to be 62 years old, going on 63.
That's incredible. Incredible.
Yeah.
And how did that affect your family, the family unit?
Well, I would say it to you this way. She was it. She was the focus. She was the heart of the family. It wasn't easy. It was hard. I'm not going to lie.
Mm-hmm.
But I never met a human being with more moxie than my sister. My sister was friends with Frank Sinatra. Not a joke.
Really?
Yeah, he used to come to Atlantic City to play at the hotels. And he would come to the special school that was there that my sister was in for a while. And she was on the front cover of the charitable night that he sang. They became pen pals until he died.
That's amazing. I love this.
Yeah. She was a pistol. She really was.
It sounds like it was a really nice gift to each other. You guys had a nice relationship, and it brings you closer to the family when one person needs more care than others. And I'm sure your father, your mother, everybody had a shared role as a caregiver as well. And what kind of values did that bring up?
Well, it started before that. So if you go back to, she was born in 1956, go back 10 years before, our grandmother bought a house that was owned by two eccentric brothers that was huge. I mean, they used to call it a mansion. But my grandmother was a nurse, and she opened a nursing home for people coming back from the war. And so we were kind of steeped in servant leadership and in caregiving as a family. All of her sisters, most of her sisters, my grandmother's sisters, were nurses. My mother and dad were both nurses after my dad left the army. So we grew up in this incredible, crazy atmosphere of care.
It was just part of the fabric of your family.
Yeah.
Everybody is in it. And when you were a child, how did you watch your parents deal with what was happening in the family? And what values did you adopt from that?
My father was a military officer. He landed in South Korea about 3 days after the armistice was signed, but it was not yet ratified. So he was considered to be a veteran of the war. And that really had an indelible mark on him. Even though the shooting had stopped, he saw the devastation firsthand. And we were raised like we were in his battalion. Now, some people would say that's abusive leadership, or that's an abusive parent. No, not at all. When your parents teach you to make your bed and how to balance a checkbook and how to be, follow the golden rule, I could think that's kind of cool.
People come back from war with all sorts of states. And in your father's case, it sounds like he made the best of it. As children, did you ever ask to hear war stories, or this was not something we talked about?
No, I mean, we had a taste of it, Catherine. I mean, we lived here in France for about 2.5 years. We were part of a group of Army officers and battalion members that were protecting NATO oil outside of Paris. And then we were assigned for 2.5 years to Frankfurt, Germany, just as the Berlin Wall went up. So you'd be laying in bed at night and the phone would ring and they would practice evacuation. So you had to be ready in 30 minutes with a little suitcase with enough clothes for 2 days. And an Army private would be driving an ambulance with my sisters and I and my mother towards a coast, either the coast of France, the coast of Holland, just in case World War III started. So I didn't have to talk too much about it. We were actually in the middle of it, in a way, in the Cold War.
Yeah. Were you ever affected by what your father came back from the war? with?
No, because the shooting had pretty much stopped at that point. What I was struck by when Dad came home was the incredible relationship he made with the Korean family he lived with. So they ran
Wow.
out of army housing and they were paying Korean families if they had an extra bedroom. And until the day my father died, he was still friendly with the family that he stayed with. We wrote letters back and forth and exchanged gifts for his entire life. He was a great guy. Got out of the service just as Vietnam got really bad because somewhere along the line he realized that he couldn't leave my mother with 4 children. So he got out and went to nursing school.
Did you also use that as an opportunity to select your major in college?
Oh, for sure. I mean, well, it's really funny because I had a boyfriend who introduced me to Cornell, and he
Mm.
wanted me to teach young children. He had had this dream that we would marry and I'd teach kindergarten. And the truth is, I love kids, don't get me wrong, but I always gravitated towards older people because we had all these people in the nursing home. So I was used to having like 57 grandparents. We had 57 patients. And I stopped and I
Oh,
saw everybody except the ones who told me not to come in their room. It was sort of like I got to Cornell and I was in early childhood education. And one day I said to the director, I love you to pieces, but I really want to work with old people. So I walked over to the agriculture school and there was one guy in the whole campus in rural sociology who studied the elderly, and he took me on. And I was the first person to graduate in gerontology from Cornell.
as you're growing up and then becoming a young adult and you get your bachelor's degree, what was the first job that you did?
So this is a I love this. This was serendipity. So one of my roommates from Cornell was from Queens, New York. And she gave me a call one day in the summer, right after we got out. And she said, my aunt is going to Florida and wants us to babysit her apartment. So I packed up my bags. I got up to New York on a Saturday night. We had a great dinner with her parents. And the next day, the New York Times came out and it had a job section. So I started calling all the law firms and people who were interested in legal research, because that's what I did about the elderly. I was interested in older people who were committed to mental health institutions against their will.
Oh,
And
yes, okay.
I got a couple of people that said, "Hey, bring us your resume. Come into the city tomorrow. We'll interview you, but you're not Phi Beta Kappa. You're not the honor society of the university." And I said, "Well, I did go to Cornell." "Oh, you went to Cornell? Come and see us." So that Monday morning, I went to see a couple of different career people. And when I got home that night, Mrs. Kaplan said to me, "You have a job interview tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock." I had no idea who this law firm was, nothing. I got all dressed up. I went. The gentleman was in a bow tie with black round glasses, and he was whispering at me, "Miss Peterson, why do you like the elderly?" And I said, "Well, because they're fun and they've got a lot of wisdom." And I said, "Mr. Goldberg, why are you whispering?" He goes, "I want to just see how you would deal with me because I'm an old man." I loved it. It was great. So he said, "I want to hire you, but you have to meet one of the other people here in the firm." I said, "Great." So he gets on the phone and he says, "Hey, Steve, I've got somebody for you to interview." And you heard a knock on the door. This guy comes in and I heard his voice. And I turned around and I said, "Steve, is that you?" And he looked at me and he said, "Is that you, Tilde?" I said, "Yes." And he looked at Mr. Goldberg. He said, "Just hire her." He and I worked together at Cornell flipping pancakes at
Oh
6
my
o'clock in the
goodness.
morning for 2 years. So
Isn't that
that's how I
something?
got my first
Wow.
job with the number one law firm, K. Scholler, Fearman, Hayes and Handler in 1973.
Do you remember, what were the main lessons that you remember learning as a young lady in this position?
Oh, for sure. So a couple of things. First off, that etiquette was not a joke. That etiquette really meant something in the world of business and in the world of people. I was so lucky to have my mother who really instilled really good manners. We had a lot of intercultural education as children. We spoke French, we spoke German. We knew how to be patient in certain situations that maybe other young people wouldn't be. I would say that my next youngest sister and I had a perspective about life that was really very, very different. And I brought that to each of the positions that I had. The golden rule, that was what my parents preached day in and day out. Do to everybody else the way you want to be treated.
With your diverse cultural exposure and languages and et cetera, how did that give you a different perspective on things and to help you navigate the business world?
First off, being here in Europe so close to World War II, you could see the devastation for yourself. And I was very clear that people were working very hard to put together a life. When we were in Germany, we had a young woman who was in her 20s who actually lived with us. And she, on the weekends, would take me and my next youngest sister to her house to be with her parents. And we saw her father, who had been jailed during the war, rebuilding his banking business. And so for me, getting out of school, going to New York City as a young woman from a very rural part of New Jersey, it was very different, but I didn't feel out of place. That's the greatest thing about the education that we got, which was no matter
Mhm.
where I've ever been that's foreign, it's really not foreign. They're just people. They're
Right.
just people. They've got something to offer.
It's knowing how to navigate or how to be with people who are just a little bit different, but in the end, it's all the same. Let's talk a little bit about clock school. Let's fast forward a bit and you tell me a bit about what that is.
Well, Clock School is an institution from Laguna Beach, California. In 1997, I was teaching a course about community leadership, and people were learning whatever their passion was for their community, how they could put together a project with between 20 and 200 people. And I was apprenticing, learning how to teach that. The lady who was teaching me lost 50% of her students because they said they didn't have enough time once the course started because they just had too many things to do and not enough hours in the day. And I thought to myself, I don't want that to happen to me. That's revenue and that's also reputation, for being a good teacher. And
Mhm.
so I said to my first class, this is the class that you paid for. And now I want you to come here on the next couple of Saturdays, whichever one you can come to. We're going to talk about time management. So they started coming on Saturdays to learn about time. And I called up a professor at Cornell and I said, I need help right away. Who's studying time? Where do I find out about it? And they helped me. So did the librarians. So I put together this 4-hour course about how to be in the world in time. And then as I was developing my consulting practice, I noticed that most of the people I worked with, my clients, didn't really know anything about time. Really, they knew nothing. They had never
Mhm.
been trained in it. They didn't really know how it works. They were using hacks and tips, color coding and doing all sorts of crazy things to try and keep themselves on track. Then there were some super people, people who were so highly planned that they couldn't do anything spontaneous. And that kind of, was sad. So one day I just said to one of my business friends, come on, let's go into business and start a school that's all about time. And she said, that's a great idea. So we started Clock School in 2012. So it's 11 years old now. We give the course in France, in Italy, in South America, in Bogota, Colombia, and all over the United States.
Now, why was it important for you at that time to develop this?
Because I thought that the difference that people wanted to make in their communities were being blunted by running around trying to do their job, trying to take care of their family. I often say I looked at my students and they looked like chickens running around with their heads cut off. And having come from a military family, we ran on military time. We were trained in how to deal with the day because my dad was captain. I was looking at my friends who were really struggling with being late. They were struggling with procrastination. They were struggling with wanting to make a difference, but not having any more hours in the day. So I said, maybe I can help. So it's been very, very emotional for me to watch people go from not having any time to having a life that they love and they live it powerfully. I'll give you an example right from Canada. One of my classmates from HEC Paris, who lives now in Ottawa, has a child that has special needs. And when the summers came, he was always throwing tantrums because he needs to have a schedule. He needs to know what he's doing several days before he does it. It helps with the syndrome that he has. Well, she was in our class and she brought this subject up. And I said to her, does he have his own personal calendar that he can work with, that he can tell you what he needs and he can coordinate with the rest of the family? She goes, no, we've never done that. I said, well, I'm going to make a suggestion. Spend $5, get a calendar, and let's see what happens. And it literally changed her family's life.
Wow, that lays out his entire day's schedule, week's schedule, and it makes him feel secure. And that's a gift that you've given this family. I do want to go back for a moment. You mentioned the word procrastination.
Yes.
And I think probably everyone struggles with this at some point or another, but I wanted to know your opinion about what you think procrastination does to humans.
So procrastination has been demonized. It's demonized. Procrastination has a couple of different lenses that you can look at the actual phenomenon from. There are people who say it's because you don't know how to regulate yourself. You don't know how to manage yourself. I don't think that's true at all. I think that procrastination usually comes down to just a couple of things that most people never get trained in. The first thing would be that you say yes to doing something that you actually are a no. You're at work, your boss says, I need you to do this, and you say yes, but you really don't want to do it. So then you put it off because you're resentful. Procrastination is also a way of your physical self telling you that maybe you've got too much going on. And the procrastination is a desperate attempt to just get some time to yourself. But it's sort of, you're doing it to yourself backwards. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Rather than just saying, I'm taking the day off, which is what I did today, people procrastinate and put stuff off because they're desperate for some time, alone time, maybe time with somebody else, but they're putting off the things that they gave their word to, the things that they said that they would get done, because they're not thinking about what they need themselves.
Do you see that your students experience that? Do they ever talk about it?
Oh, all the time. All the time. I had a young lady who was in Africa from Kenya working at a bank. Again, the kind of thing, the glass ceiling. She's been there for a very long time. She's trained a lot of men who have been promoted. She's still where she is, right? And she's been putting off talking to the CEO of the bank for a really long time. And she did our program a year ago. And she made her mind up. She was going to go see the CEO and have a conversation with him. And she went and had that conversation and said, why is it that you don't promote me? He looked at her kind of point blank and said, I had no idea you wanted to be promoted.
Oh.
He had no idea.
And it never occurred to him that
Never
she could
occurred
be a
to
candidate?
him. And then I found out from her later on that she never formally applied for anything. She wanted it sort of as a gift, like, hey, I'm here,
Yeah.
acknowledge
Yeah.
me. Well, that's not necessarily in a big bank in the middle of Africa the best way to promote yourself in your career. I'm not saying you have to blow your horn every day, but maybe once in a while you go to HR and you say, hey, if anything juicy comes up and you could use me, I'd really like to move up. She had never done that.
Tying it in with time management and your entire theme of time and the clock school, at what point did you decide, maybe I need to step away from this? Because you were CEO for a while, right?
Oh, I was CEO for the whole thing until I got
the
here
whole
to
thing. Okay.
Toulouse. I was
Okay.
sort of like, I get here, we're in the middle of the pandemic. I arrive on a Tuesday, and Saturday night, the president shut the country down. So now what am I going to do? I'm here in school, but, the firm still needs to work. A year into this, I was sitting with one of my professors, and he looked at me and he says, you really can't be CEO anymore. You really you can't have your feet in two different places.
Yes.
So
Yes.
this young lady who lives not too far from you in Ottawa said yes. I never handed over a package so fast in my life. I beat Amazon. I was like, okay, here's what I do all day as CEO. Have fun. Call me if you
Here you
need
go.
me.
Bye.
So I show up once a month on the board meeting. I do
Hmm.
lead the classes in English. My dream is to leave that company as a legacy to people because there is no training in time that we know of worldwide. We haven't found it yet.
You took the words out of my mouth. The next question was going to be, tell me about legacy. What does that mean to you?
You know, all those years at the nursing home, I would be with people as they were transitioning because sometimes their families couldn't make it. My mother really didn't let me do that much until I was about 16 or 17. And then some nights I would just go over and sit in somebody's room and just chat with them, or just maybe they'd want me to read the prayer book of their faith or whatever. And they would talk to me about what they wanted their children and their grandchildren, their friends to know that meant something to them, you know, what like life meant to them and what those people provided for them in their lives as they were leaving this world. And it's somewhere along the line, it was sort of like, this life is not about me making a fortune. What's more important to me is that the people who have been involved in our network, in our company, who come to our classes. I mean, I've taught 65,000 people in different coursework that we do. That's a lot of people, right? And just
Right.
think of the network effect that if they have good results, if they change their lives, the lives of the people around them change. So I would like people when, you know, they come to say goodbye to me to say, you know, she was a good Joe. She did good. You know, she's a little kooky, but she was good.
It makes more sense to be impactful at a very local, close level, I think.
I think that's right, because it's the ripple effect. There's a wonderful book. It's called The Honor Code by Kwame Appiah. He's now the ethicist editor for the New York Times. And that is where you can see that when you deal locally with that the people need, and you're handling those issues, it cascades. Because then the person that was helped will help the next one. You know, the movie Pay It Forward. That's my dream.
Yes. And I'm sure all the people who came across your path would agree with that. That's
I would
a
hope
lot of
so.
people.
That would be my
Yeah.
dream.
Can I ask you, how has your relationship with time changed over the years?
Oh, let's just go back just a couple of months. We lost our mom.
I'm sorry.
27 days. She was born on Christmas Day, 1931. And we lost her 27 days before her 91st birthday. And she was a pistol. And in the moment that my mother transitioned from this world, I felt like somebody gave me a t-shirt that said, "You're next." I know that
Oh
sounds
my
funny.
God.
People go one of two ways when I say that. They either get like terribly like shocked and they're like a little crazy, you know, like, what did she say? But truly, I mean, you know, when you're very, very young, you never think about not being here. But as you age and your friends start to pass, you start to realize there is an end to what we're doing here. It's like, don't ever look backwards. Don't look in the rearview mirror. Look forward. And where can you go next in your next position, in your next place of business, in your next move to a locality, because you know, maybe you want to be by the beach instead of being in the concrete jungle, whatever it might be. Have those moves that you make be for something other than just pleasure. As I go to leave this world, I'd like to be able to say to myself, you know, I did some good. I made a difference.
thank you to Thilde Peterson for this incredible conversation. You can learn more about Clock School by visiting the link in the episode description. I absolutely loved hearing Thilde's stories and insights, and I hope you came away from this discussion with a fresh perspective on time and legacy. If you did, please share it with a friend and leave a review wherever you listen. Your feedback helps us make the show even better. And So She Left is made by Cansulta and Ethan Lee. We'll be back next Wednesday with a new episode. Our music is by Chris Zabriskie, edited for your enjoyment. You can find a list of all the songs you heard here in the episode notes. I'm Catherine Vasilopoulos, and thanks for listening.